Welcome to Graveyard of Secrets, where history's darkest mysteries come back to haunt us. Tonight, we uncover one of the most chilling and unsolved cases in true crime history, the Zodiac Killer. Codes that remain unbroken, letters that taunt, and a killer who vanished without a trace. Stay close, because some secrets are buried, and some never die. On a quiet Friday night in San Francisco, 1969, a cryptic letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. No name. No return address. Just a strange, hand-drawn symbol, a circle with a cross through it. The writer claimed responsibility for multiple murders, and promised more. He called himself the Zodiac. The letter wasn't just a confession. It contained a cipher, dozens of strange characters arranged like a puzzle. Solve this, the killer wrote, and you'll know who I am. The city was gripped with terror. Police scrambled, reporters speculated, and amateur codebreakers across California tried to crack the riddle. Within days, couples were too afraid to park on lovers' lanes. People checked their rearview mirrors twice. No one felt safe. A high school teacher and his wife eventually cracked one of the ciphers, but it revealed no name, only a chilling message: I like killing people because it is so much fun. More letters followed, each stamped with the same cryptic crosshair symbol. Sometimes he sent pieces of victims' clothing. Sometimes he called the police himself, taunting them on the phone. The Zodiac seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. By the mid-1970s, investigators had a stack of letters, multiple eyewitness descriptions, and a handful of suspects, but no arrest. 2 ciphers, including the infamous Z340 code, resisted every effort to decode them. For decades, experts and cryptographers tried, and failed. Even the FBI admitted they were stumped. Then, in 2020, a team of 3 amateur codebreakers finally solved the Z340 cipher. But instead of a name, the killer mocked authorities again: I am not afraid of the gas chamber, it will send me to paradise. The real identity of the Zodiac remained hidden. To this day, at least one code, the shorter Z13 cipher, is still unsolved. Did it really hold his name, or was it another cruel trick? The Zodiac case remains open, a haunting reminder that some voices refuse to be silenced, and some secrets refuse to be told. It was the summer of 1969, a season of music festivals, protests, and promises of peace, but under the bright California sun, something far darker was lurking. In the Bay Area, 2 young lovers sat parked on a quiet lover's lane, their car surrounded by darkness. A shadow emerged from the night. Moments later, gunshots shattered the calm. When police arrived, they found a horrific scene, and no clues about who had pulled the trigger. The killer had vanished as quickly as he came, leaving behind only fear. Weeks later, a letter appeared in the mailbox of the San Francisco Chronicle. It wasn't a plea for help, nor was it an apology. It was a boast. Written in neat block letters, the message claimed responsibility for multiple murders. At the bottom was an odd symbol, a circle with a cross through it. The letter demanded publication on the front page, threatening that more killings would follow if ignored. The killer wanted to be seen, to be heard, and to be remembered. This wasn't a simple threat, it was theater. Enclosed with the letter was a cipher, a strange grid of symbols and characters, carefully arranged to conceal a hidden message. Solve this, the writer dared, and you'll know who I am. It was a game played at the expense of innocent lives. Editors debated whether to print it. Police debated whether to take it seriously. But fear has a way of forcing decisions, and soon, the mysterious symbols were staring back at millions of readers over their morning coffee. Within days, 2 other newspapers received nearly identical letters. Each bore the same chilling crosshair symbol, each demanded publication, and each claimed more murders. For the first time, San Francisco realized these killings weren't random acts of violence, they were part of something much larger, orchestrated by a man who craved not just blood, but fame. Soon, he gave himself a name. In a follow-up letter, written with the same cold precision, he signed off with a single, haunting word: this is the Zodiac speaking. It was unlike anything police had ever seen. Killers didn't usually brand themselves like comic book villains. The signature was both arrogant and terrifying, a promise that this was only the beginning. Newsrooms buzzed with panic. Police departments across Northern California scrambled to share information, but the killer's messages seemed to cross jurisdictions effortlessly. Detectives in Vallejo, Napa, and San Francisco began to compare notes. Ballistic tests linked multiple shootings. Suddenly, separate crimes were part of one terrifying puzzle. Every new letter brought fresh waves of dread. The killer claimed to be watching children as they got off school buses. He described future murders in shocking detail, daring the police to catch him. Officers worked around the clock, but the Zodiac seemed to stay one step ahead, appearing, striking, and disappearing again. The cipher itself became a national obsession. Codebreakers, amateur sleuths, and professional cryptographers all tried their hand. The FBI and Navy intelligence pored over the symbols, but the answer came from an unexpected place. A schoolteacher and his wife cracked the first code within a week. The solution didn't reveal a name, but it exposed the killer's twisted mind. I like killing people because it is so much fun. That revelation terrified everyone even more. This wasn't a man seeking revenge, money, or even political attention. He was killing for pleasure, and he was intelligent enough to taunt the entire state while doing it. The signature symbol, once just an odd doodle, became as recognizable as a warning label. When people saw it, they didn't think of circles or crosses, they thought of death. The name, Zodiac, spread like wildfire. It appeared in every headline, every radio bulletin, every whispered conversation in San Francisco bars. With each letter, the killer grew bolder, his confidence swelling as he watched the world dance to his tune. No one realized it yet, but a game of cat and mouse had just begun, a game the killer seemed determined never to lose. As the name, Zodiac, began appearing in bold print across every newspaper in Northern California, a strange new feeling settled over the Bay Area, a tension so thick that even everyday routines felt dangerous. San Francisco, Vallejo, and Napa had always been bustling, open communities, but now streets emptied early. People looked over their shoulders when walking home. A late-night knock on the door sent a jolt of panic through even the bravest households. It wasn't just the murders themselves that terrified people, it was the way the killer seemed to be everywhere at once. He didn't limit himself to any one neighborhood. Young couples were attacked while parked on lovers' lanes. Students feared walking home after dark. Even parents began driving their children to school, terrified by the Zodiac's threats to shoot out the tires of school buses and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. His words alone turned ordinary mornings into heart-pounding ordeals. Radio stations broadcast emergency updates. Newspapers ran warning columns. Police urged citizens to stay vigilant, but what could they do? The Zodiac gave no clear pattern. His attacks were separated by miles of winding highways, wooded backroads, and suburban sprawl. Anyone could be next. People started locking their doors during dinner. Couples avoided romantic drives. Even movie theaters saw thinner crowds, as fear spread faster than the killer himself. The killer's phone calls added another layer of dread. On more than one occasion, the Zodiac phoned the police directly, calmly describing his latest murder in chilling detail before hanging up. He always spoke in an almost casual tone, as though he were talking about the weather. Detectives traced the calls, but he never stayed on long enough for them to close in. The city began to feel as though the killer was watching everything, as though his crosshair symbol might suddenly appear outside anyone's window. For police, the panic was overwhelming. They had to reassure the public without admitting how little they really knew. Patrol cars were assigned to follow school buses. Officers checked isolated roads and lovers' lanes nightly, shining flashlights into parked cars, often startling innocent teenagers just trying to enjoy an evening. Even as officers doubled their efforts, the Zodiac continued to strike, seemingly indifferent to the increased presence of law enforcement. Rumors spread like wildfire. Every odd neighbor became a potential suspect. Every unfamiliar car cruising down a quiet street drew suspicion. The killer didn't have to attack to terrify people, his letters alone were enough to keep an entire region on edge. When another envelope arrived bearing the familiar crosshair logo, residents braced themselves for the worst. Some letters included scraps of blood-stained fabric torn from victims' clothing, proof that the Zodiac was not bluffing. Even places once considered safe began to feel haunted. Lovers' lanes, picnic spots, and scenic overlooks turned into scenes of silent dread. Gas station attendants kept shotguns under the counter. Hitchhiking, once common in the late 1960s, dropped sharply as stories of strangers turning violent made headlines. People began to wonder if the Zodiac was just one man, or if others were copying him, hiding under his symbol to commit their own crimes. The chilling truth was that the Zodiac had managed to control the narrative. He didn't just kill people, he manipulated an entire region, feeding fear to the public, the press, and the police. The more his name appeared in headlines, the more powerful he became. He even mocked law enforcement for their inability to stop him, writing about how much fun it was to see them scramble. His words painted him as a ghost, untouchable and ever-present. Parents told their children to stay indoors after sunset. Couples stopped taking scenic drives through wine country. Businesses suffered as fewer people went out at night. The Zodiac didn't just take lives, he stole the sense of safety that Northern California had always enjoyed. The Bay Area felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next attack, the next letter, the next mocking cipher that no one could solve. By late 1969, it seemed the killer could strike anytime, anywhere. With each new letter, people scanned the streets for suspicious figures, memorizing license plates, locking car doors, and avoiding strangers altogether. California had never felt so small, or so vulnerable. The Zodiac wasn't just hunting victims. He was hunting everyone's peace of mind, and no one knew when, or where, he would surface again. As Zodiac's reign of fear spread, his letters grew more taunting. In his very first batch of correspondence, sent to 3 different Bay Area newspapers, he included a cipher that promised to reveal his identity, if anyone could decode it. The strange symbols, neatly arranged in a 340-character grid, were unlike anything most people had ever seen. To the public, it looked like gibberish. To law enforcement, it was a ticking time bomb, a puzzle they needed to solve before the killer struck again. The newspapers printed the ciphers just as Zodiac demanded, each letter accompanied by his chilling threats. Readers across California pored over their morning papers, tracing the mysterious characters with their fingers, wondering if the key to stopping a murderer was staring them in the face. Police cryptographers and even the FBI began working around the clock to break the code, convinced that a name or a clue was hidden within. But the solution didn't come from federal agents or professional experts. Instead, it came from an unlikely place, a quiet suburban home. Donald Hardin, a schoolteacher in Salinas, and his wife Betty, were amateur puzzle enthusiasts. When they saw the cipher printed in the paper, they decided to tackle it themselves over the weekend. While most people locked their doors and prayed for safety, the Hardins sharpened their pencils and set to work. Betty had an instinct: killers with egos often start messages with I. She guessed the Zodiac would reveal something personal about himself. Using common patterns in English, she and Donald slowly replaced symbols with letters, marking and erasing late into the night. The more they worked, the more the puzzle began to unravel. It was like peeling away a mask, one careful stroke at a time. After days of effort, the message finally took shape. But instead of a confession or a name, it was something far darker. I like killing people because it is so much fun, the cipher read. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. Zodiac boasted that he collected slaves for the afterlife and hinted that his identity would remain hidden. This revelation sent shockwaves through California. The police had hoped for a lead, a name, anything to narrow down their search. Instead, the cipher exposed a chilling philosophy. This wasn't someone killing for revenge or money, this was someone killing for pleasure, someone who thought murder was a sport. Even worse, Zodiac had tricked everyone into thinking the cipher held his name. He was playing games, and he was winning. The hardened solution was confirmed by cryptography experts, and soon Zodiac himself acknowledged it in a subsequent letter. He laughed at the idea that anyone thought he would simply give himself away. The newspapers printed the decoded message, and the public's terror deepened. What kind of man wrote such words so calmly? What kind of man dared police to catch him while declaring that his favorite hobby was murder? The cipher also revealed something else. Zodiac was meticulous. The construction of the code wasn't random. It showed careful planning, patience, and intelligence. Investigators realized they weren't dealing with an impulsive killer, but someone who enjoyed puzzles as much as he enjoyed taunting law enforcement. Each letter was a move in his twisted chess game, and each murder was just another piece taken off the board. While the first cipher had been cracked, it left detectives with more questions than answers. If Zodiac could design such a code and mislead everyone so easily, what else was he capable of hiding? Were future ciphers just diversions to waste time? Was he laughing every time investigators stumbled down the wrong path? The police were beginning to realize that catching him might require outthinking him, and that was no easy task. For the people of California, the cipher changed the Zodiac from a shadowy figure into something even worse, an intelligent predator. He wasn't just brutal, he was clever. The words, "This is the Zodiac speaking," now carried the weight of a man who thought of murder as a game, and who delighted in watching everyone else play by his rules. And if his first cipher was only a warning, no one could predict what his next move would be. Even after his first cipher was cracked, Zodiac showed no fear of being caught. If anything, the public attention seemed to thrill him. Instead of going silent, he doubled down, sending more letters to newspapers and law enforcement, each one more mocking than the last. He spoke as though he were orchestrating a grand performance, and the police, reporters, and terrified citizens were merely his audience. In one chilling letter, he bragged about past murders and hinted at future ones. In another, he included bloody scraps of a victim's clothing to prove his claims were real. He knew investigators were desperate for hard evidence, and he fed them just enough to keep them chasing his shadow. But every lead turned cold, every description was vague, and every suspect slipped through their fingers. Then came the phone calls. After an attack at Blue Rock Springs Park, a calm male voice called the Vallejo Police Department, describing the crime scene in precise detail and claiming responsibility. There was no tremor, no panic, no sign of remorse, just a flat, steady tone, as if you were reading off a grocery list. By the time officers traced the call to a payphone, Zodiac had already vanished into the night. The killer delighted in making law enforcement look powerless. When police increased patrols around schools and lovers' lanes, he wrote letters ridiculing their efforts, claiming he could kill anytime, anywhere. He even threatened to attack school buses, promising to shoot out their tires and gun down children as they fled. The image of a madman stalking innocent kids sent waves of terror through California parents and forced police to follow buses in marked cars. Reporters were no safer from his games. Zodiac frequently wrote to editors demanding that his letters be printed on the front page, or else more people would die. Newspapers faced an impossible choice: refuse him and risk more bloodshed, or publish his threats and risk fueling his ego. Most chose to print, hoping to avoid immediate violence, but in doing so, they gave him exactly what he wanted: attention and control. His arrogance reached new heights when he sent letters mocking the police directly. "I like killing people because it's so much fun," he wrote again, this time adding cryptic references to his collection of slaves for the afterlife. In another letter, he scoffed at detectives who believed they were closing in on him, promising they would never catch me because you don't look hard enough. These weren't just threats, they were psychological warfare. Every time the police thought they had a lead, Zodiac seemed to slip away deliberately, almost as if he were watching the investigation from the inside. When officers speculated in the press that Zodiac might be a military man or an expert marksman, he addressed it directly, teasing them with hints but never confirming anything. Each letter read like a cat batting around a helpless mouse, savoring the fear he caused. The killer also used disguises and bizarre costumes to confuse witnesses. During the infamous Lake Berryessa attack, he wore a hooded black executioner's mask emblazoned with his crosshair symbol, terrifying his victims before stabbing them. Survivors described his deliberate, almost robotic movements, as though he was performing a ritual rather than a spontaneous attack. These details only fueled his image as an unpredictable phantom. Inside police departments, frustration grew to anger. Detectives worked around the clock, comparing handwriting samples, interviewing suspects, and analyzing the ciphers. But Zodiac never slipped up. He knew how to send letters without leaving fingerprints, how to vanish after each crime, and how to exploit the press to keep himself in the spotlight. Even experienced investigators began to wonder if they were dealing with someone inside law enforcement, or someone who understood police tactics intimately. By late 1969, Zodiac had transformed his killings into a game, a public spectacle where he pulled every string. His letters weren't just confessions, they were challenges, daring authorities to outthink him. The police weren't chasing a man, they were chasing a ghost who enjoyed watching them fail. And with every taunt, every phone call, every cipher, the Zodiac's legend grew darker, his identity even more elusive. Even as investigators pored over Zodiac's letters and ciphers, one unsettling fact became clear: not all of them could be solved. While the first major cipher had been cracked by the Hardens, later ones proved far more resistant. These puzzles weren't just games, they were deliberate barriers, carefully designed to frustrate anyone trying to uncover his identity. The most infamous of these was the Z340 cipher, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in November 1969. This grid of 340 symbols baffled everyone who tried to decode it. FBI cryptographers, Navy codebreakers, mathematicians, none could find a clear solution. For decades, the cipher sat like a locked door, mocking every attempt to open it. Investigators suspected it might reveal a name, a location, or even a confession. But the door never budged. There were other codes as well, smaller but no less mysterious. The Z13 cipher, a string of only 13 characters, seemed to promise the killer's identity: "My name is." Yet no one could make sense of it. Was it an alias? A trick? A meaningless jumble designed to waste investigators' time? Some cryptographers believed the shorter ciphers were unsolvable by design, deliberately crafted without a true key, just to humiliate those who tried. As years turned to decades, these unsolved codes took on a life of their own. Amateur sleuths from around the world spent sleepless nights trying to break them. Books, documentaries, and online forums buzzed with theories. Some claimed the codes contained dates of future murders. Others insisted they held references to famous movies or literature. A few even speculated that Zodiac had hidden multiple solutions inside the same cipher, laughing as people chased different trails. Meanwhile, law enforcement grew increasingly frustrated. If the ciphers contained Zodiac's real name, why couldn't the world's best codebreakers unlock it? And if they didn't contain his name, what was the point of sending them at all? Every unsolved puzzle reminded detectives how much power the killer still held, even long after the murders stopped. In 2020, over 50 years after Zodiac first terrorized California, a team of 3 amateur codebreakers finally cracked the Z340 cipher using computer-assisted analysis. But the breakthrough only deepened the mystery. Instead of a name, the decoded message mocked authorities again, stating, "I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." Zodiac had lied from the start, his ciphers never intended to reveal who he was. The smaller codes, Z13 and Z32, remain unbroken to this day. Experts debate whether they even have legitimate solutions. Some believe Zodiac intentionally scrambled meaningless symbols to give the illusion of a solvable riddle. Others argue the keys may have been hidden in physical clues that no one ever found. Without a definitive answer, these ciphers stand as monuments to his arrogance, a reminder that he could manipulate investigators even from the shadows. For the families of the victims, the unsolved codes added another cruel twist. Every time a new theory appeared in the press, hopes rose that the killer's name would finally come to light. But every time those theories collapsed, frustration and grief returned. The codes became less about justice and more about ego, a puzzle designed solely for Zodiac's amusement. Even now, cryptographers continue to test new methods, from advanced algorithms to artificial intelligence, hoping to unlock the remaining mysteries. Each failed attempt only reinforces the legend that Zodiac was not just a murderer, but a showman who turned his crimes into an intellectual game. And with every year that passes, the unsolved ciphers remain exactly as he intended, enigmatic, haunting, and cold. They are a silent laugh from a killer who disappeared into history, leaving behind questions that no one has been able to answer. For over 50 years, the Z340 cipher taunted everyone who tried to decode it. Law enforcement agencies, professional cryptographers, and hobbyists alike spent decades staring at those 340 symbols, certain they concealed Zodiac's name or at least a crucial clue. But every attempt failed. Some experts even began to wonder if the code was unsolvable, just a cruel hoax designed to waste everyone's time. Then, in December 2020, a surprising announcement shocked the world. A small team of amateur codebreakers, not government agencies or elite mathematicians, claimed they had finally cracked the cipher. The team consisted of David Oranchak, a software developer from Virginia, Jarl van Eyck, a Belgian computer programmer, and Sam Blake, an Australian mathematician. They had no badges, no authority, only persistence and a willingness to try methods no one else had attempted. Using advanced software and custom-built code-breaking tools, the team tested millions of possible combinations. Unlike traditional cryptographers, who relied on pen, paper, and intuition, this team leaned on raw computing power to detect patterns invisible to the human eye. Over time, the cipher began to unravel, not in neat, clean lines, but in fragments, like a shredded letter slowly pieced back together. When the message finally emerged, the world held its breath. Would this be the long-awaited revelation of Zodiac's identity? Would his name finally be etched into history, and justice at last take shape? Instead, what came out was another cruel joke. The cipher did not reveal a name, a location, or any concrete clue. It was simply another taunt. The decoded message read in part, "I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." Zodiac bragged that killing people brought him pleasure, mocked authorities who thought they were getting closer, and confirmed his sadistic ego. But once again, he gave no hint of who he really was. This revelation devastated many who had waited decades for closure. After all the sleepless nights, after half a century of theories and investigation, Zodiac had once again denied the world the answer it wanted most. He had lied from the beginning when he hinted his ciphers would reveal his identity. It was all a game, a performance in which he always controlled the script. Law enforcement agencies confirmed the solution, and the FBI publicly acknowledged the breakthrough. But their statements carried a bitter undertone. Solving the cipher was an extraordinary technical achievement, yet it did nothing to bring investigators closer to catching Zodiac. He had written the message to humiliate them, to prove that even if they solved his hardest puzzle, they'd still have nothing. The Z340 cipher also revealed just how meticulous Zodiac had been. His codes weren't random strings of letters, they had structure, symmetry, and logic. Breaking it required extraordinary computational effort and a deep understanding of linguistic patterns. Even decades later, experts marveled at the killer's intelligence and planning, proof that he had been more than just a violent maniac. He was deliberate. He was patient. And he wanted everyone to know it. Meanwhile, two of Zodiac's other ciphers, the Z13 and Z32, remained unsolved. If the Z340 could be cracked by modern methods, perhaps these shorter codes could be too. But what if they contained nothing at all? What if they were simply traps designed to keep investigators guessing for eternity? The 2020 breakthrough answered one question but raised a dozen more. The cipher showed Zodiac's arrogance, his desire to play God with both lives and information. Yet his real identity stayed hidden, shielded by layers of deception. Even in solving his hardest puzzle, the world had not moved an inch closer to unmasking the man who signed every letter with chilling confidence. This is the Zodiac speaking. Even as Zodiac's letters and ciphers made headlines, investigators quietly assembled a growing list of potential suspects. Each seemed promising at first, until every lead dissolved into smoke. Detectives interviewed hundreds of men, checking alibis, handwriting, and backgrounds, but the killer always seemed just out of reach, like a phantom who knew how to stay invisible. The most famous suspect was Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher with a troubling history. He owned weapons, wore Zodiac-style watches, and reportedly made disturbing comments about killing people. His handwriting looked suspicious, and one acquaintance even claimed Allen had bragged about wanting to call himself Zodiac. Police searched his home twice, uncovering weapons, bomb-making materials, and other unsettling items. Yet no hard evidence tied him to the murders. Handwriting experts said his penmanship didn't match Zodiac's letters. Fingerprints didn't line up. DNA samples were inconclusive. Allen died in 1992, still denying any involvement. Other suspects emerged over the years, each one briefly hailed as the possible killer. Richard Gaikowski, a journalist with radical ties, fit some eyewitness descriptions and had cryptic writings of his own. Lawrence Kane, a career criminal with brain damage, lived near several crime scenes and matched a composite sketch. Ross Sullivan, a library worker, disappeared after one Zodiac murder and reportedly wore similar clothing to the killer's costume. Each man had pieces of the puzzle, but never the whole picture. The frustration grew unbearable. Every time a promising suspect surfaced, police ran handwriting analyses, compared shell casings, checked fingerprints. But Zodiac's letters were too clean, his crimes too careful. Whoever he was, he left almost nothing behind, not even the forensic breadcrumbs most killers inadvertently drop. Even when DNA technology advanced in the 1990s and 2000s, the evidence from Zodiac's letters was either degraded, contaminated, or insufficient to provide a definitive match. Witness statements only added to the confusion. Survivors and bystanders described the killer as a stocky white male, anywhere from his late 20s to mid-40s, with brown hair and glasses. But those descriptions varied slightly from scene to scene, leaving investigators unsure if they were chasing one man or several. Some even speculated that Zodiac deliberately altered his appearance to mislead witnesses. Decades later, amateur sleuths on the internet began digging up their own suspects, combing through public records, family histories, and cold case files. New names appeared, men who had criminal records, lived in California during the murders, or had strange personal writings. But just like the official suspects, these leads went nowhere. Zodiac had become a blank canvas onto which people projected their theories, each one more sensational than the last. The FBI and local police kept files on dozens of potential suspects, but every trail ended in disappointment. Some suspects died before they could be fully investigated. Others were cleared by rock-solid alibis. Still others were too tenuously connected to pursue. It was as if Zodiac could step into the spotlight whenever he wanted, then vanish without leaving a single shadow behind. Even after the Z340 cipher was solved in 2020, no new suspects emerged. If anything, the solution confirmed what detectives had long feared: Zodiac never intended to reveal his name. The codes weren't confessions, they were toys, distractions, and traps. While investigators argued over handwriting samples and ballistic reports, the killer sat back, confident that no one would ever truly find him. The sheer number of suspects underscored how slippery the case had become. With every false lead, the real killer seemed to grow stronger, more untouchable. By the 1980s, the Zodiac investigation had become one of America's most infamous cold cases, a symbol of how even the most determined police work can fail when faced with an adversary who knows how to disappear. Through it all, one chilling thought haunted detectives and amateur sleuths alike: what if the Zodiac was never any of these men? What if the real killer had lived an ordinary life, unnoticed and unsuspected, quietly smiling every time someone else's name made the news? The Zodiac Killer case is often told through codes, ciphers, and theories, but at the heart of this chilling mystery lie the real lives that were torn apart. These were not just names in a police file or statistics in an investigation. They were young people, full of hope, whose stories ended violently on lonely roads and quiet nights. Remembering them isn't just a duty, it is a way to ground this entire case in reality, away from the cryptic letters and toward the human cost. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were high school sweethearts. On December 20, 1968, they parked on a quiet road to share a moment away from the world. What should have been a night of innocence turned into horror when the Zodiac struck without warning. Their families woke up the next morning to headlines rather than hugs, and the simplicity of young love became a symbol of senseless loss. Their deaths would mark the beginning of a reign of terror. 7 months later, Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau sat in a parked car on July 4, 1969. The night air was filled with fireworks, laughter, and celebration, but for them it would become a trap. The killer approached silently, flashlight in hand, and opened fire. Darlene died at the scene, while Mike survived, becoming one of the few living witnesses of the Zodiac. His description of the attacker added precious clues but also carried unbearable weight. He had seen evil face to face. On September 27, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard decided to picnic by Lake Berryessa. A man appeared wearing an eerie hood emblazoned with a cross-circle symbol. He spoke calmly, as if rehearsed, before binding them and stabbing them repeatedly. Cecilia would die 2 days later, Brian would survive, and his detailed account of the attack would become one of the clearest windows into the Zodiac's twisted mind. The killer even phoned the police to report his crime, almost as if he wanted the world to watch. Just weeks later, Paul Stine, a hard-working cab driver, was gunned down in San Francisco on October 11, 1969. This wasn't lovers in a parked car or hikers by a lake, this was a brazen murder in an urban neighborhood. The Zodiac mailed Stine's bloody shirt to the newspapers as proof, taunting investigators and terrifying an entire city. For Stine's family, the shock of losing a husband and brother became overshadowed by sensational headlines and the killer's mocking letters. These victims were not just props in the Zodiac's sick performance. They were sons, daughters, friends, and dreamers. They had favorite songs, inside jokes, and plans for the future. The killer robbed them not only of life, but of all the moments they never got to live. In focusing on ciphers and puzzles, the world sometimes forgets the laughter that was silenced and the families that never healed. The pain rippled outward. Parents buried children. Siblings grew up in fear. Communities locked their doors at night, wondering who the killer might strike next. Newspapers printed the Zodiac's cryptic messages in bold headlines, but the quieter stories, the grief, the funerals, the birthdays missed, rarely got the same attention. These were not faceless victims, they were human beings whose absence was felt at every dinner table and holiday gathering. Every time the Zodiac sent a letter boasting of his crimes, he reduced people to trophies and statistics. He wanted the world to marvel at his intellect rather than mourn his victims. But behind every cipher solved or unsolved, there is a bloodstain, a last breath, a scream in the night. The victim's humanity is what keeps this story from becoming just another intellectual exercise for armchair detectives. Some of the survivors, like Mike Mageau and Brian Hartnell, lived with scars, physical and emotional, that never truly healed. They had to recount their trauma over and over to police, journalists, and strangers fascinated by the case. Their memories are both crucial evidence and haunting reminders of how close they came to death. Living as a survivor of the Zodiac wasn't a victory, it was a life sentence of fear and questions. As the decades passed, the names of the Zodiac's victims faded from public memory, replaced by theories, suspects, and cryptograms. But for their families, the case was never just about a mysterious killer, it was about a chair left empty, a voice forever silenced, a wound that time never closed. These are the lives we must remember, even as we search for answers hidden in symbols and codes. The Zodiac Killer wasn't just a murderer, he was a master of psychological terror. While his bullets ended lives, it was his words, his letters, and his ciphers that controlled the entire Bay Area. Fear spread faster than the police could investigate. Ordinary people suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders, questioning the safety of their own homes, cars, and neighborhoods. The killer understood that panic could be as powerful a weapon as a gun. He didn't merely attack randomly, he manipulated perception. Lovers' lanes, once a place of romance, became scenes of dread. Families avoided lakes, parks, and hiking trails. Every headline, every published letter, served as a reminder that the Zodiac could strike at any time. The city itself became a prison, with fear as the invisible bars. Parents didn't just fear for their children, they feared for the safety of entire communities. Zodiac's threats against school buses, though never realized, forced schools to coordinate police escorts. The very thought of a man targeting children sent a shiver through households and ignited paranoia. Mothers clutched their kids tightly, fathers patrolled streets after dark, and neighborhoods turned into self-imposed fortresses. Even the police, trained to face danger daily, were not immune. The killer mocked them directly in his letters, criticizing their methods, their theories, and their failures. Officers spent hours chasing leads that turned cold, analyzing handwriting that may have been deliberately misleading, and trying to decode ciphers that remained unsolvable. Zodiac's fear-inducing tactics created a sense of inadequacy that no badge could erase. Media outlets became unintentional partners in spreading terror. Every letter printed on the front page, every phone call transcribed and broadcasted, amplified the killer's influence. People read his messages aloud to friends, discussed possible suspects, and debated whether their own neighbors could be the murderer. Zodiac understood that public hysteria was a tool he could wield as effectively as any weapon. The codes themselves were an extension of his psychological control. By sending letters that contained ciphers no one could solve, he created a lingering tension. People obsessed over the symbols, speculated about their meaning, and poured time and energy into cracking them. Each unsolved puzzle was a reminder that the killer's mind was still one step ahead, invisible yet omnipresent. Even in the aftermath of attacks, fear persisted. Survivors carried trauma that shaped every aspect of their lives, while entire towns carried collective anxiety. The killer had transformed everyday routines into acts of caution. Parked cars were scrutinized before approach. Rearview mirrors became constant companions. Even casual strolls became tense exercises in observation and survival. Zodiac's psychological manipulation extended beyond immediate victims. Witnesses who came forward lived under constant scrutiny, their words analyzed, their credibility questioned, and their safety threatened by the mere fact that they had seen him. The fear wasn't limited to death, it was perpetual uncertainty, an invisible chain that bound the city's population. By combining real violence with subtle, manipulative communication, Zodiac created a climate of terror that affected everyone, whether they lived near a crime scene or miles away. His letters and ciphers ensured that no one felt safe, even when they were doing nothing wrong. Fear became an instrument, one that turned entire communities into pawns in his macabre game. Even decades later, the Zodiac's power over fear endures. His cryptic messages, unsolved ciphers, and the mystery of his identity continue to fascinate, terrify, and unsettle people. The fear he created isn't confined to the past, it exists in every retelling, every documentary, every speculation about who he might have been. The legend of the Zodiac lives as much in the imagination as in history, proving that terror can survive long after the last shot has been fired. Even after decades of investigation, cryptography breakthroughs, and endless speculation, the Zodiac Killer's true identity remains a mystery. Unlike most criminal cases, there is no neat resolution, no final arrest, no courtroom closure. Instead, the story hangs in the air, unfinished, like the final sentence of a book that was never completed. The unsolved ciphers, the ambiguous letters, and the vanished suspects all feed into this enduring uncertainty. Each new discovery, whether a partial DNA match, a handwriting analysis, or a modern forensic breakthrough, offers hope, but ultimately raises more questions than it answers. Every clue becomes a thread in a tapestry too complex for anyone to fully untangle. Communities across California still whisper about the Zodiac. Lovers' lanes, hiking trails, and quiet streets remain shadowed in legend. The terror he imposed in the 1960s and 70s left an imprint so profound that even modern residents, decades later, feel a chill when the story is recounted. Fear, in a sense, has become part of his legacy, an echo that never fades. For the families of the victims, the open-ended nature of the case is agonizing. They live in a world of questions without answers. Who truly killed their loved ones? Was justice ever possible? Did the killer die, or is he still walking among ordinary people, blending in seamlessly? These uncertainties have haunted generations, leaving grief unresolved. Law enforcement agencies continue to monitor leads, review old evidence, and compare Zodiac's letters to contemporary suspects. Advances in technology, like genetic genealogy, offer tantalizing possibilities. Yet even these methods may never fully uncover the truth. The killer's careful planning, foresight, and ability to vanish into plain sight make him a puzzle that resists completion. Writers, journalists, and amateur sleuths keep the story alive. Every documentary, podcast, and online forum re-examines suspects, theories, and cryptic messages. Each retelling adds new layers of intrigue, speculation, and fear. The Zodiac Killer has transcended the historical events themselves, becoming a cultural icon of mystery and terror. Psychologists and criminal profilers study his letters and ciphers to understand his mindset. They note his need for attention, his manipulative genius, and his calculated cruelty. While they may explain his behavior, they cannot reveal his identity. His anonymity is part of what allows the legend to endure. It is impossible to separate the myth from the man. Even the solved Z340 cipher, once thought to hold a critical revelation, provided no real closure. The message confirmed his arrogance and cruelty but offered nothing concrete about who he was. It reminded investigators and the public alike that Zodiac's ultimate victory may have been remaining a ghost, untouchable and enigmatic, taunting the world without ever being caught. The open-ended nature of the case leaves an unsettling realization: there may never be a final chapter. Every new investigation, every theory tested, only deepens the mystery. The Zodiac could have died long ago, or he could be living quietly under a false identity. His actions and letters ensure that uncertainty remains eternal. And so, the story of the Zodiac Killer continues to linger in collective memory. It is a tale of terror, genius, and manipulation, one in which the last word has never been spoken. Each unsolved cipher, every unidentified suspect, and the echo of fear that spans decades reminds the world that some mysteries are designed never to be solved, leaving the final answer suspended in shadows, forever out of reach. Despite decades of investigation, cryptography breakthroughs, and countless theories, the true identity of the Zodiac Killer remains a shadowy enigma. His letters, ciphers, and cryptic messages continue to haunt the collective imagination, a chilling reminder that some killers are never caught. The unsolved codes, the vanished suspects, and the terror he spread are all part of a legacy that refuses to fade. The victims' names live on, etched in memory and history, while their families carry a grief that has never found closure. The communities that once trembled under his reign of fear still whisper his name, and lovers' lanes, secluded parks, and quiet streets remain a subtle reminder of the horror that once stalked California. Even with modern technology, from DNA analysis to digital forensics, the Zodiac's careful planning and meticulous concealment make him almost untouchable. Each breakthrough uncovers more questions than answers, confirming that he played a game he intended never to lose. He was not just a murderer, he was a master of manipulation, controlling fear and attention with a precision that outlasts time itself. And so, the story of the Zodiac Killer remains unfinished, a riddle woven into the fabric of history. Every unsolved cipher, every open-ended letter, and every lingering clue reminds the world that the final chapter has yet to be written. The question that has haunted generations remains: who was the Zodiac? Perhaps he is gone, his identity lost to history, or perhaps he walks among us, blending seamlessly into ordinary life, forever laughing at a world desperate for answers. The legend endures, as terrifying as the man himself, because some mysteries are not meant to be solved, they are meant to live in the shadows, haunting the imagination long after the last shot was fired. And in that darkness, the Zodiac speaks again, not in letters or ciphers, but in the very fear that lingers wherever his story is told, a chilling whisper that some monsters are never truly caught, and some puzzles remain unsolvable, even for those who dare to try. The Zodiac Killer may never be caught, and some codes may never be solved. But the terror he created, the lives he stole, and the mysteries he left behind will continue to haunt history, and now, they haunt you. Keep searching for the truth in the shadows, only here, at Graveyard of Secrets.